Call the November 23rd meeting of the Canby Planning Commission to order. Let's stand and, if you wish, for an invocation and the pledge. Lord, thank you for bringing us all together in this place this evening. Everybody got here safe and sound. Bless this meeting, that it is orderly, and we can fill Mr. Hensley's dinner needs later on. And in your name, amen. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. We'll start off with citizen input on non-agenda items. Do you have any of that out there? No. So, has everybody had a chance to read the minutes of the last meeting?
Yes.
I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded to approve the Planning Commission meetings for September 28th. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Okay, we are going to have a public hearing for a site design and conditional use approval to construct a new self-storage facility. That's DR 15-06 /CUP 15-03. The public hearing format looks like this. We will have the staff report, questions, if any, by the Planning Commission. Then we will open public hearing for testimony. We'll hear from the applicant, not more than 15 minutes. Then we will have proponents, persons in favor of the application, not more than 5 minutes per person. Then we'll hear from any opponents. Those are the people that are opposed to the application, not more than 5 minutes per person. Neutral, people that are neutral on the issue, not more than 5 minutes per person. Then we will have rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes. Then we will close the public hearing. Then we'll have questions by the Planning Commission. We will have discussion, and then we will render a decision. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please step forward when the chair calls for proponents if you favor the application, or opponents if you are opposed to the application. To the microphone, state your name, address, and interest in the matter. You will also need to sign the testimony sheet, and while at the microphone, please say your name and address prior to testifying. You may be limited by time for your statement depending upon how many people wish to testify. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. All questions must be directed through the chair, and any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or other land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and interested parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the City Council and the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Before the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may ask the hearings body for an opportunity to present additional relevant evidence or testimony that is within the scope of the hearing. The Planning Commission shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing or leaving the record open for additional written evidence or testimony. Any such continuance of extension shall be subject to the limitations of the 120-day rule unless the continuance or extension is requested or agreed to by the applicant. Any additional documents or evidence are provided by any party. The Planning Commission may, if requested, allow a continuance or leave the record open to allow the parties a reasonable opportunity to respond. Any such continuance or extension of the record requested by an applicant shall result in a corresponding extension of the 120-day period. Let's see, I think that covers that. Hi, Lainey, how you doing?
Good.
I didn't see you come on in. Shall we proceed with the staff report? Brian?
Thank you. We're ready. The slide up here shows you where this property is located at, and it also shows you the unique shape and configuration of the lot, and that it is set away from Southeast First Avenue with an arm that reaches down. It's about 53 feet wide where it actually meets, and so that has some parameters on what kind of frontage improvements are proposed with this application. The application involves both a site and design review, so we have a site plan here of a proposed development for the site and design review type 3 application, and there's also a conditional use as a part of this as well. And the conditional use application is required primarily because there is two zoning districts on this property, which is not the standard. The body of the property is all M1 zone, which is industrial zoning, but the arm that reaches down as access is actually CM, commercial manufacturing zoning. And it always causes some confusion when a property has more than one zoning to it. And
Is that right?
that's right. That's the CM portion. And then there's also an applicable overlay zone district, the industrial overlay zone. And that zone applies to the Pioneer Industrial Park, and it adds and substitutes a few other standards that would normally not apply to the underlying zoning districts. And one of those standards is a desire to seek out uses that will result in a minimum of 12 employees per acre in the proposed developments that occur within the industrial park. And I think we've probably discussed that before, and not all of the uses in the industrial park have achieved that. The council recently made a public policy declaration for staff to use, and saying that we were proposing to get rid of that requirement. They said, let's keep it, but not think of it as an absolute requirement, but a target to try to aspire to. And staff is probably going to take a request back to them again sometime in the next year with additional data indicating it's probably not a desirable requirement to have in our industrial park. But besides that, with this particular use, they've talked about one full-time employee and two part-time employees for this project, and so that comes nowhere near to meeting that standard. The code is set up in a manner that if you can't meet the standard, then you have an opportunity to propose a use that doesn't through the conditional use application process. So I have a long-winded way to get to you why we have that application. And it's also somewhat related to the fact that the use itself is indicated as an outright permitted use in the M1 zone, if you think of it as a warehousing kind of use. We have done that before historically in Canby because we have allowed many warehouse facilities in the M1 zone outright. without a conditional use permit. However, those were possibly allowed prior to the industrial overlay district going into effect, that now talks about not that uses that don't relate to and support industrial uses need a conditional use permit. And so there's another possible reason why they need a conditional use permit. If you believe that this is more of a commercial use than it is a warehousing use. And the National Business Classification System that our code is not based upon actually thinks of many warehouse storages as more of a commercial use. A commercial use, even if it's a retail commercial use, is an outright permitted use in the CM district, which is in the arm of this, if you wanted to get it any more confusing. So I believe there's a few gray areas that we're dealing with on this. Nothing is completely straightforward, as you probably know, so we're just pointing out these nuances and how we try to apply this. As you probably read through the staff report, we're okay with the recommendation of approving this use in this location, subject with the 2 zoning districts that are on this property. The conditional use process allows you that discretion to make that decision. This is a picture of some of the elevations of the buildings to give you some idea what it's going to look like. And I've got a slide in here for us to discuss a couple of the issues that have come up. But generally speaking, a mini warehouse facility has lots of individual little storage units, and I don't know that I've ever seen one built anywhere that didn't use metal roll-up doors to accommodate and make them work. And we do have a requirement in the industrial overlay district that says the exterior buildings shall not be of metal. It says, however, metal accents are perfectly appropriate. So deciding on either the aesthetic and/or functionality requirement with this unique use for roll-up doors out of metal is something that is appropriate for you to use your discretion to decide on in this particular use, whether that is consistent with metal accents and details and functionality needs for this specific use or not. This is a landscape plans, and so the site is pretty much paved all the way through, and with the buildings, 4 different buildings located, and around the perimeter is where they're proposing the landscape that has been shown to meet the ordinance requirements. They also have a protective security chain link fence that goes around the outside edge as well. I guess that's about all I need to say there. I was going to mention that they are proposing this development in 2 phases, doing building A and B first, and then C and D at a later time. And don't know the time frame for the second phase. This is a good picture that shows you about where the driveway, where the sign is. That is about where the driveway access point will come out to meet Southeast First Avenue. And that's looking, eastward. And so back behind us is the Providence Medical Center on Southeast First. And you can see there's a sidewalk that's coming up along that street that stops pretty much at the property line for this property. And so that is somewhat of what you'd see frontage improvements continuing across the 53-foot wide driveway. There'll be some widening of the street and curb and planter and sidewalk installed to and right where the driveway is, and then a taper very quickly to the existing pavement width that you see on this road. Is what's proposed. We did go out and check the width of this street, and it's at the absolute minimum that would allow two-way traffic in a safe manner, which is 20 feet. And that is the width that the code does require for a development, not only just in front of it, but along its frontage. And in this case, the frontage is just the 53 feet. But a unique thing about this requirement is that we had a traffic study performed. One of the recommendations was that those people using the facility as they exit, that there be a sign erected on the private property that says right turn only as you leave to get to Highway 99E. The reason is if you go the other way, it turns into a one-way street. It's a dead end for you, and that would force you to go through the Providence private drives, which I don't think is really appropriate. And so it's recommending that they go back around Hazeldale to get to 99E. If they're doing that, they're using this rural-type road that isn't yet developed to a full city standard. What you're going to see is that happening with some sort of future development. I don't know if I can get back to the site. It's just the lot that's in front of this one that fronts on Southeast, when that lot develops, or the adjacent lot to the east, there'll be frontage improvements required for Southeast First Avenue then. But what we have proposed, and the applicant has agreed in the last couple of days, is to sign what we call a consent and waiver of remonstrance agreement to future local improvements that would require them to connect to a future gravity sewer line that would be out on Southeast First when other properties develop, or to consent and not protest a local improvement district that the city council might choose to form for the benefit of the surrounding properties owners here that would install a sanitary sewer line up and down the street. Because what we have agreed to, and it's not clear in your packet of materials, is that the Public Works Department and the city engineer have agreed to a private grinder pump system that would be connected to a private line that would pump the sewage to this development approximately 200 feet to the west into a manhole in Southeast First Avenue.
At the risk of asking a silly question, what is a grinder pump system?
It's just basically a pump, like similar to a water well pump.
Okay.
Pumps.
It has an impeller on the bottom that, as it draws it in, it grinds up the effluent.
I just envisioned a giant.
Yeah, it's small, and it will be maintained by the private property owner. And the reason that it was primarily agreed to is because this particular use has one restroom to serve that one employee and the two half-time employees, and maybe a visitor at the office. So it's a very low use in terms of the sanitary sewer for the size and scope of the buildings and such that's going to be built out here. And the sewer system is going to be, a gravity sewer system will eventually be constructed to serve the other lots in this development, and it may be something that's most appropriate to do through a local improvement district. And that's something that does need to be a majority of property owners have to agree to such a district, and it has to be set up and approved by the city council to make that happen. because of the nature of this particular use, we thought it was appropriate, and its lack of frontage on the street, to use this private grinder system in this case. So here's, I've already mentioned a couple of these, but we talked about the dual zoning on the property. And one of the things that that the zoning has helped them with an advantage is that they feel like visibility from Highway 99E is important for them. So they thought about a pole sign, but pole signs aren't allowed in the industrial overlay district. If you've looked at the rest of the development out in the Pioneer Industrial Park, you won't see any pole signs. You'll see monument signs, as we call them. The CM district does allow very large monument signs, 150 square feet, and that's what they're proposing. Starts at the ground and goes up. Now I'm forgetting the height. Probably, was it 18 feet?
30 match of 30 is the
Oh, 30 feet high. Okay, that's right. I thought it was higher than 18. So 30-foot high monument sign is what's being proposed. That is allowed within the CM zone. The location where they're putting the sign is in the CM zone on this property. So it seems appropriate from the code that they do that, and it certainly meets the needs that they were after and thought were very important for this particular development. The frontage improvements, I just indicated to you that we feel with filing this remonstrance agreement, dealing with the sanitary sewer system and lack of a gravity-fed system currently, that anytime in the future that one is present, they will be required to do away with their private grinder pump system and connect to that gravity sewer, or to not protest and participate in that local improvement district if one is ever formed, to try to get the necessary improvements out along First Avenue. Then the traffic study recommendations, I already mentioned that right turn sign out only as being the primary recommendation that came from that. We talked about all the conditional use permit items, and then we also mentioned the exclusion of the metal building exteriors. We also had a letter from one of the adjacent business owners in this park, Scott McCormick, who helps manage and coordinate the development of the Trend Business Center, which includes 2 buildings and a third one that's been approved that they're about ready to start construction on, and eventually a 4th building. And they, their letter talked about the possibility that they might be using a metal roof, and apparently that is true, and concerned that if it was a sloped roof, that would look like a metal building because you would see the metal roof. Talking with the applicant today, it's in fact has a slight slope to it, but it's not a roof that you're going to see. And the elevations that we were provided with confirm that you don't see the roof. And that's true with most of the buildings in the industrial park. Staff could not tell you if or how many of those buildings have metal roofs because you can't see them as you're driving by on the street. Therefore, it appears to not have been an issue in the past if you can't see the roof. And so you may want to ask and confirm that with the applicant on this. If so, it seemed to satisfy the concerns of that neighbor if you can't really see a metal roof. And I don't believe that you can on what's being proposed. And then the parking standard was somewhat interesting for this as well. If you use our code standard for a warehousing type use, talks about a parking space for every 1,000 square feet, well, they're building like eventually 43,000 and some square feet, so you'd have 43 parking spaces. And that obviously is a ridiculous standard that has no basis for this mini warehouse facility. So staff looked out to see what the next widest used standard is, which is the Institute of Traffic Engineers Parking Generation Study. And it indicated for a use of this many square feet for a mini warehouse facility that 7 parking spaces is what they recommend in their standard. Our code indicates that for any warehouse use, 5 spaces are the minimum required, and they're proposing 6. So staff's satisfied that 6 will handle what they need in terms of parking for an employee, possibly 2, and a visitor or 2 that might come at the office. There might be more than 1 at a time. And everyone else is driving through their unit, and they're parking in front of their unit. There might be a larger vehicle that might need to park around the edge, and they've provided some loading spaces, I think 4 of them, around the edge of the site that will take those larger vehicles that might park out on the edge. So we're satisfied that the parking standard is appropriate as well. I wanted to share those additional information regarding that with you. And to finish off, staff did recommend approval of these 2 applications subject to the conditions listed in the staff report. And just to make it clear, with a modification to, maybe I need to find the number. A modification to condition number 2 that's in the staff report that talks about complying with the city engineer's comments in his letter. The second comment in the city engineer's letter is regarding extending a gravity-fed sewer line to this development. Well, that was before they agreed to this alternative of the private grinder pump. And so I'm recommending that condition number 2 be modified with the following wording, which says to conform with the applicable findings of the city engineers. And I was going to add, except for item number 2 regarding the sanitary sewer service, for which agreement has been made to allow a grinder pump and private force line to be installed with a tracer wire in the southeast First Avenue right-of-way to, I can't read my writing, to run into an existing manhole that's located approximately 200 feet to the west of this property. And there's also a request to add an additional condition number 9, where the applicant shall execute and record a prepared consent to local improvements and waiver of remonstrance agreement to assure future connection to the public sanitary sewer at the time a gravity sewer main is available in southeast First Avenue when extended to or across the easterly property line of the development by others, and to consent to the formation of an LID, a local improvement district, by the City Council for the purpose of assessing the cost of such sanitary sewer improvements projects to the benefited properties, including any part of this property. So if you need to refer to those suggested amendments, you can do so, because I've written them out here. That's all I have. If there are any questions about this. So.
Any questions?
What becomes of the stormwater? Does that go into the grinder pump to be moved to that manhole?
No, the stormwater is handled separately. They're proposing some on-site swales. All stormwater runoff must be retained on the property and handled in a proper manner that way. So they keep those separately.
What would be an alternative to the metal doors?
You'd have to ask the applicant.
Any further questions? We'll now hear from the applicant. And who's going to speak for the applicant? State your name, address. Yeah,
Ready
50.
to bring the PowerPoint, so bear with me 1 second. Okay, I'm Scott Beck, architect from here in Canby, 361 Northeast 3rd Avenue. And as stated before, the project is proposed to be 4 buildings. The two furthest to the north would be the first phase, buildings A and B. You can see as the flag lot comes in off of Southeast 1st Avenue, you come down to the point where the site next, there'll be a gate right there, a card lock power gate, and right to the right of that gate, there are 2 parking stalls. There's an office located in that facility. Within the office and adjacent to it, there'll be a restroom and then a electronic kiosk. The project is really kind of a cutting edge design where you'd come in, you'd log into the kiosk and get your passcodes and be prepared then, to be able to enter the project, and with real limited access from the public other than, the card key system. The design of the buildings are intended to be a real clean appearance, kind of a modern look. The whole thing about, metal siding, metal materials, I don't know this for sure, but I would think the intent of that is really to eliminate the pole building appearance, kind of a corrugated metal, building that you might think that would be an agricultural building or an industrial building. There are an awful lot of metal, buildings that are nice looking. I think the JV Northwest building here in Canby is an example of a metal building that's tastefully done. The code, the overlay does promote concrete and masonry buildings. The architecture of this building and the materials are primarily, they're like a hardy cementitious panel. We've got 2 systems. One of them is a hardy reveal system, which has panels 4x8 with a horizontal reveal joint and vertical reveal joints. They give the appearance of stucco. And the other panels are, again, larger sheets with a batten. So the overall appearance should be more of a, appearance of stucco or concrete tilt as opposed to looking at all metal. The metal doors are kind of a necessary evil. The only other alternatives really would be a wood door. And you stop and think about, like a wood garage door at your home, you don't see those as many as you used to. The maintenance on them is high. They tend to warp. You have to paint them off, and they're just not very practical. There may be like a fiberglass door, but I don't even know that they exist, on a project of this type. And so it's difficult to find another material, another door product that is appropriate. So we're kind of in a quandary as, how to get around that. Some other components of the project that would be metal would be the jambs between the doors and the headers, and they're a very clean, slick, appearance that has a look of tilt-up concrete or stucco again. Landscaping-wise, we've got perimeter landscaping 25% of the trees are of a larger caliper so that they'll grow faster, provide a little bit more of a screening, sooner. As far as like the 12-employee thing, the site is somewhat limited because of the fact that it is a flag lot. It's not as desirable as it would be if it had frontage right on the street. And so that, makes it a little bit more difficult to put certain types of businesses in there, or businesses that might have, larger industry with bigger trucks. If you had that kind of traffic flow in here with large trucks, you would eat up a lot of the site with the maneuvering patterns. So the mini storage proposal here, makes a lot of sense for this type of a piece of property. It's kind of tucked away and hidden. You don't need great exposure for this type of use once you're, familiar with the fact that it's there and you have a sign and an office. It's quite visible from the highway intersection at, I guess it's Sequoia and 99E. As far as the metal roof, I've got some examples of a similar project. Let me show them to you. I guess they're on the back of one of these. This is an example in Hillsboro, Oregon. The roof pitch is 112, so 1 inch of rise in every foot of run. And the buildings aren't very tall, they're just a single story. And with that type of flat roof pitch, you'll see in those photographs, you really do not see any semblance of a roof line at all. If you were a long distance away and up on a higher elevation, you might, but at that point, you probably wouldn't be able to discern it's a metal roof versus a composition roof or whatever. If you built a 3-story building right next to the property and you were able to look down on it, then you might be able to see it. But metal roofs aren't that unattractive. You could easily put like a built-up roof on it that's, roll-out tar paper. It's got tar seams. If you look down on that, they're not anything special to look at either. So, again, the fact that this has such a flat pitch, I just don't think you're going to see the roof whatsoever. Do you have any questions of me?
What? Other than now the fence, the gate is going to be controlled by a card key, is that, or a...
It's a swipe key, is it not? Card reader?
It'd be a push button.
Oh,
Push button.
keypad, I guess.
Code to get in.
Okay, so are there going to be any cameras or other security measures?
Yes, there'll be cameras around the perimeter of all the buildings,
Okay.
as well as on the keypad itself.
Okay. That's all.
Anybody else?
I have a question. You said the building C and D would be built after the fact. What will become of that particular land? Will it just be as is, or temporary grass put in, or do you have any idea?
The site, I believe the site will have to be graded at once in the beginning. There is some fall to the property, and so it will be graded. I believe your intent is to build a gravel pad.
Can I interrupt for just, if he's going to chat, can you kind of move up here, pull a chair up, and
Sure.
identify yourself, name and address?
I'm sorry I don't have all the answers.
Well, that's how it was advertised that you would. I'm shocked.
My name is Jason Phillips. I am one of the property owners and applicant. And my address is 24845 Southwest Mountain Road, West Lynn. And I appreciate you allowing me to speak here. I don't even get to do that at home, so.
I understand.
We might talk about some of the operations and also, the buildings C and D.
We haven't ruled out the idea of doing the project all at once, but financially, we want to make sure that we can perform. So if we have to do it in 2 phases, we are seeking that approval in the beginning, not necessarily if best case scenario, we don't have any surprises or issues with financing the entire project, we would proceed with doing the entire thing at once. We've discussed possibly asphalting the building C and D areas at the same time that we would asphalt the entire project, to possibly utilize that space for maybe some storage, or just so we don't have an issue with erosion or anything of that nature. Would it be all right if I were to speak as a proposal, as a
proponent?
Proponent of the...
Are you all through?
I think so, unless you have any other questions of me.
Okay, so, yes.
Carry on. All right. So obviously, the unique shape of the property lends itself well to a project like this, and that we are able to pull vehicles off of the main street, and they can be stopped, use the keypad to get in and out, so we're not obstructing any traffic flow. With the width of the access strip, it's not beneficial to large semi-trucks that would need to access that as if it was of another use. Obviously, this property's been vacant for several years, and it's my understanding there's not any other buildings proposed in the near future on any of the other parcels. So I look at it as we're definitely going to be adding a considerable amount of value and taxes to the community and to the county, as well as construction jobs for the time of construction. And we'll also technically have someone on staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to answer problems or questions that come up. So if you were to look at it, on an hourly type of job basis, if you were to consider 7 days a week, this essentially would take 4 people to cover that shift, plus our janitorial, landscape staff that are going to have to be there 7 days a week as well. Certainly, this project has a very low impact on the utilities, the sewer, water, power, natural gas resources. There's not a lot of need for heavy power or high volumes of water. And Ms. Rocha, you asked about an alternative for the metal doors. And as Scott stated, there aren't a lot of alternatives. And partly is the design standard in that the doors need to roll up into a drum. And we're not able to do that with a panel type door. So what you'll find in most storage units is people stack as much stuff as they can in theirs all the way to the ceiling. And if you have a track that the doors have to follow, you lose a considerable amount of that area. And so on. I think that's why you'll see most all of these type of buildings have the metal doors so that they are able to roll up into that drum.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any more questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other proponents? If you'll come up, say your name and address, and okay.
My name is Scott Salisbury. Address is 17400 Henry C. Road, Oregon City. I guess they pretty much took all the good stuff, but there's a couple things that maybe didn't get brought up that are important. And one, I'll be real brief on this, but just kind of the system that we're going for And how it works, I think somebody asked, it's actually pretty cool. There's a kiosk and people pay with their credit card. They get a passcode. Each person has a separate passcode, so when they come into the gate, they're on camera, on security. We know when they came in, what time, when they left, how long they were there. And the good thing about that is it eliminates a lot of the riffraff that we're kind of used to paying cash for mini storage units and living in them, or doing who knows what. This new system really eliminates 99% of that stuff. You have to pay with a credit card. It really tracks who comes and goes. So it's actually a pretty cool system. And there's also a big need for it. I don't think that got brought up, but if you search, and you're probably not going to do this tonight, but if you were to search in Canby mini storage and look for a storage unit right now, nearest one available is Sherwood, which is 10 miles away, and then it goes from there. The ones in town are 100% full. I believe there's I could be wrong on this, but I think there's an apartment complex coming back behind Fred Meyer's. This is a growing need. For whatever reason, storage is in demand, and there is absolutely zero spaces available. Canby, Oregon City, any of this area. So I think it's something that's needed, and it also helps to the fact of if we do end up doing this in 2 stages, all projections show that it'll be very quick. It's not going to be 10 years down the road to the second phase. In fact, the manager we're looking at, who runs some other storages, says you guys need to be ready to go ASAP, because if this was on the market today, I could fill it in 6 months. So it's not going to be a prolonged thing where we have weeds growing out everywhere. I think it should be fairly quick. And then just on the metal doors again, there's really not another option. And I'm assuming that if we go to every other place within that industrial park that has bay doors, which I'm sure they all do, they're all going to be metal doors within there. There's just really not another option for that. That's all I have to say.
Any questions for Scott? Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Any neutral? Oh, there are all kinds of neutral folks. If you'll just step forward, name and address.
I'm Craig Llewellyn. I have some property on First and Walnut there in the industrial park.
Craig Harris with AAI Engineering, 4875 Southwest Griffith Drive, Suite 300, Beaverton, Oregon.
So I guess we're more neutral. I'm not really a proponent, but there's 2 issues here. The first one's this overlay zone, and then the second issue is the cost fairness of this thing. I was a big part of the process for that overlay zone a few years ago, and that was the whole town came together on this thing, and the whole point, and just really want to remind everybody what the purpose of that overlay zone was. That overlay zone was to make this thing a high-quality industrial park, bringing in good family wage jobs. Now, I do agree with the planning director that at the time, the employee per acre was high, 12 or 13. It is high, and that should be addressed. But you really have to ask yourselves, and whatever way you go, I stay neutral, but the reason we did that overlay zone is to have a good quality industrial park, bringing in the good jobs. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of industrial park do you want to have here? What I really find interesting is 4 or 5 years ago, there was a towing company that wanted to come into this industrial park, and because of this overlay zone, they couldn't come in. If I were them, I'd be livid, but is this really what you want your park to look like? We have an opportunity here that we won't get back again. And so the second thing is the cost fairness of this thing between AFDs and LIDs. And as property owners, I'm going to have Craig Harris talk on this a little bit more. But there was a formula that was created for Hazeldale Way. And it was created because the initial AFD that was imposed on properties out there that was completely unfair. And this formula was developed to have cost sharing for the entire park. And it was to make it equitable, because how do you make all these properties, the big properties, the small properties, the properties with houses on them? These properties with houses on them, by the way, are worthless. This is industrial, not residential anymore. So how do you make that fair? And we came up with a formula to help do that, and it could be used for the entire property. And I'll let Craig Harris kind of talk more on this. He's our engineer that helped do the First Avenue and Walnut Street.
Yeah, if you, when the park was created and a lot of the Sequoia Parkway, Hazeldale Way, all those streets were put in, there was a formula put in that properties that use these systems help participate in bringing the systems up to speed so that we could have the park and bring projects to Canby. So with this current property coming in, it's just got a small width up front, and that's all it's done. I am happy to see the letter waiver of remonstrance for the sewer, but I think there should also be one probably looked at for the rest of the improvements for First Street and any other improvements that would need to be made for the park as a whole if you're going to open it up to use that maybe doesn't meet the 12 employees per acre. That was, the letter of remonstrance was news, but it sounds like it's only for the sewer. And as you saw by the picture that Byron put up, it was, that First Street is pretty minor. It's right at the bare minimum, and adding the traffic to it would be, other than the initial move-in, there's probably not a lot of traffic generated by the mini storage, but that would be one thing to be considered of. And I guess the other thing that they talked about, phase 2 not being done and paved and storage, well, the only thing that sounds like to that would be RV storage, which we do in other mini storages for phase 1. So I don't know if that's a use that's allowed or if that's considered, what the screening would be different on that for a kind of a RV storage, boat storage, and such like that. So I'd consider that. The roll-up doors is again, looking at that, I don't think that's as much of an issue once phase 2 is done, because the whole perimeter would pretty much have the backing of like building A, north elevation. I don't see it looks like the buildings are all backed up to the property line, so you'll have a rear elevation of the buildings that'll have the Hardy panel, I'm assuming, on the backside. So once it's fully built, the roll-up doors won't be seen as much. The roof, if the pictures are shown, look good, but those are all at a ground elevation. There is some elevation across the park, so I don't know, as long as it's not a shiny silver metal roof, I don't think it's that big of an issue. But if it stays with the same color palette, I don't see an issue with that. The other issue that I'd like to bring up on behalf of Charlie Burden is the drywall system. I think they're using underground infiltration, not swales. That I believe the plan I saw, and I think the one that's being proposed down at the finger for the driveway is he's pretty close to Charlie's drinking well. He's got a drinking well that's within a certain distance, and I believe it needs to be at least 100 feet away, and I think it's closer to 80. So I don't know if that's a level for this thing, but it should be looked at. So you wanted me to bring that up for concern. I think that's all I have for you.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other neutral third parties? You look like you're anxious to chime in here, so please state your name and address.
Good evening. My name's Charlie Burden, and I represent the property owners just to the north. Our address is 23230 South Highway 99E there in Canby. I appreciate the opportunity to address you this evening. Our main concern is that as the property manager for the property representing the CCD Hazeldale LLC, we want to make absolutely sure that our well is kept safe for the people that we are serving that drink from that well. And we want to bring to your attention that presently, when I've checked the plans, it looks as if it's within that 100-foot zone, and I believe that the distance should be wider than just 80 feet that I estimate that it's presently at. I think that it should be extended, their drain system should be extended back so that it's outside that 100-foot zone, just for the safety of the drinking water. I've checked with one of our well specialists in the area. He had shared with me that in some of the other areas that they had worked, one specifically where they'd had storage units, they had had people that were unauthorizingly dumping things into the drains. We certainly hope that that would not happen here. I was very pleased to hear that they're going to have a good security system. We would like to make sure that anything that is done there on site doesn't contaminate the water system in the area. So we appreciate your consideration for that. I appeal to you asking that we would make sure that the zone would leave us at least 100 feet distance between their system and our well. So thank you very much.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so if there are some rebuttal, do you have any from the proponents, any rebuttal on what was brought up?
Yeah, I can do that real quick.
No? Okay, it's your time. You have 10 minutes. But you still need to come up here and restate your name and address.
Actually, Pat will take care of this.
Oh, well, we're familiar with Pat's, but we're going to hear his name and address all over again.
Good evening. Pat Sissel, Sissel Engineering, 375 Portland Avenue, Gladstone. I just wanted to address the stormwater issue, and we weren't aware that there was a well. We looked at the City of Canby's map and their stormwater master plan that shows well locations, and that one, I guess, isn't identified or isn't identified in the right spot. We can certainly move the stormwater infiltration system for the lower part of the site back, so there's 100 feet of separation from the Burden's well. Just if Mr. Burden would agree that we can get onto his property to survey the location of the well, then we can make sure that we keep adequate distance. Or maybe his engineer already has that location and he can send it to me, and we can make sure we keep adequate distance. The majority of the stormwater is generated up on site where the buildings and the aisles are between the buildings, and the main stormwater system for the site is up in the body of the site. The driveway that goes down the First Avenue is going downhill, so we just put a separate system at the bottom of the driveway to collect the water that comes off driveways that's headed down First Street. We'll move that back up the hill and get more separation from the well.
Can I ask him a question? Are they considered UICs that are going to have to be DEQ approved, proposed on this site? And is there more than one?
There is more than one, yes.
Because I believe that our master drainage plan was approved with a 216-foot separation from any existing water well.
Yeah, if we know the location of that well, then we can get the adequate separation. And there are swales around the perimeter of the site, but the purpose of those swales is really to handle any run-on water that might be coming at this site from the south in a big storm event. We've all seen that there's some standing water on Hazeldale Way at times, and so we've designed the site in those, that there's a natural low spot around the west side of the site already where this site bumps up against Providence, and we're creating a low area along the east side of the site so that any water that comes at this site in a big storm event, in case Hazeldale floods, water's coming over the property, it'll go around the perimeters of the site, and we've got ways for the water to get past the driveway and past the building so that people who are storing property in these units, they don't get their units flooded out. That wouldn't be good.
Not be good. We all agree on that.
Scott, you got a couple of things?
You said it better than I could.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
Nope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that ends our rebuttal period. So at this time, I will close the public hearing. No further testimony is allowed. So we will move along to any discussion we might have.
I kind of have a couple questions. I
You kind of
guess.
have a couple of questions.
Kind of have a couple questions.
What was your name, sir?
Mine
Yeah.
is Craig.
Craig. This is where, as a public servant and volunteer, you hope you don't sound like an idiot, because about 93% of what you all said is brand new to me. But I appreciated what you said about the overlay zone, right? Is that what that's called? And I also appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit that you have and wanting to, start a new business and meeting a need in town. So I see both sides there. I'm not a huge industrial park fan per se. I like pretty parks and things like that, but I know that there's a need for that, and I like ours. I think ours looks really nice, and driving through there, I'm impressed with the businesses that are there and all that. So I guess this is kind of a surfacey or a cosmetic question, but what's it going to look like? What's the are those the actual colors of the building portrayed there?
Not the blue and orange ones.
Right, the one on the left?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've put some thought into aesthetics then and blending it in with the surrounding buildings a bit so that it's
And really
pleasing?
excuse me.
Go ahead, that's okay.
Our site doesn't have